So, I want to share about a recent trip to India that I took. And I was part of a delegation of educators, trade representatives, and some creative professionals that came with me. We left like March 6th and returned just a week ago. And first, we were in Delhi for a couple of days, and then we traveled south to Orissa, which is a growing state in India that is to the south and east and is has a long coastline along the Bay of Bengal. So, first of all, I just want to say that I have this long-running history with India. And it actually started in 1994 when I traveled there. And after that, and I went from Delhi to the north, up near Tibet and Nepal, and I spent most of my time in the northern parts of India, up near the Himalayas, and then I traveled down south to Kerala, and was at the southernmost tip of India, and that was like a three week trip. And I can say emphatically that India has absolutely developed since then. And that was like 30 years ago. I wrote a little travelogue about it back then. So I have captured some of my thoughts from back then, and I can compare it. In fact, I was at the Taj Mahal back in 1994, and they took us to the Taj Mahal this time, and the crowds at the Taj Mahal were probably 5 to 10x what they were back in 94. And so what that reflects is this growing middle class idea that we read about and hear about, but I was actually seeing it firsthand. And what it shows is that in India, people now have some vacation time and disposable income to go and tour their own country, just like we do in the United States. So I do want to also highlight that India is the largest democracy in the world, and we share that with them. We are also both the US and India maritime democracies. And when we were at the Ministry of External Affairs, which is similar to our State Department, that was also mentioned and highlighted. And the diplomat that we spoke with was educated in the United States and really had an amazing command of all things US and India. Um, and I also want to mention that I asked him about my areas, which are sort of energy, AI, and infrastructure. And there's been a lot of investment in the last 15 months, even by three of the top hyperscalers, spending like $70 billion largely on data centers. And he just mentioned that, you have to strike the balance between, data security and food security. And because data centers require a lot of energy, they also some that may be built there have water resources, whether it's indirect or direct. And so he was very mindful about the trade-offs with that. And that's something that we're grappling with in the United States as well. Um, and then the other thing to note was that India has, it's the fifth largest economy in on the globe. We're number one at like $30 trillion economy. China's number two. Germany is $5 trillion, Japan 4.3, and then India, which is the fifth largest economy, is like $4.1 trillion as of late, and their growth rate is about 6% per annum. And they sort of foresee this type of growth rate, for the next years ahead. And so I expect they will be pulling ahead of Germany in the not too near distant future. And so they also import $1 trillion in trade. So those are massive numbers. And one thing I can say about this growing middle class, where I really saw it too, was in the education. There are many, many universities in India, all sorts of tiers. And we visited one in the state of Orissa down south. And, you can really see that that is a path for development, and it's a huge human capital story, which was playing out right before my eyes. Also, I was at a summit called the Blue Economy Summit, and I got to speak there about sort of ocean related ventures and sort of what the prospects could be with that. Now I'm more focused on developments on the land, but where we intersect very much is in the area of natural capital and working with one's natural resources, not in an exploitative way, but very much in a stewardship way. And so I was able to at least talk about that. And also just that I really recognize that the tech savvy youth of India really hold a lot of promise ahead. And I met a number of startups, and they were doing some very impressive ventures with ocean related initiatives and also really focused on sustainability. And I know that that's one of India's goals as well, is very much trying to, do things sustainably. So now I want to sort of drill in a little bit about some of the sort of economic observations about India. So back in 2008, I had worked with a co-author who is a distinguished finance professor, and we sort of looked at infrastructure development in India and what that was going to take, which was a lot of capital. And I can absolutely say that I was stunned at the amount of energy, transportation, ports, all sorts of investments have been made considerably in the last 2 decades. And I was really taken aback. In fact, I sat on an airplane from Delhi to Bhubaneswar, Orissa, and next to me was a woman who was an engineer. And she worked at a firm, and I asked her, what were some of the top projects she was in right now? And she said, we really do a lot of transportation projects all over the country. So it was like I was really seeing in, firsthand that this is real and this is growing, and it's not just sort of an academic exercise, which was sort of what I had done back in 2008. So it's like I was witnessing some of this again firsthand. And the woman also invited me to her office, and I didn't have time. And I said, next time I'm in Bhubaneswar, I will definitely come and see you. But also, what's interesting is India is a huge domestic market. They have a huge consumer class now, and that is bodes well for them for the future because they have this large domestic market, and so I think that makes them a little bit, it's easier to withstand shocks, just like in the United States. And the other thing I want to mention is I noticed that, as they have developed, some of the things that they're sort of focusing on are, for example, the film industry. Many cite Bollywood, but we were shown some of the various really top class films that have been developed in India in their film industry, and they're really taking hold around the world, and they have some new ones coming out that are probably going to be winning awards. The other thing that I was also mentioned, aside from them really kind of getting going on the education front, is that they're also pivoting to sports more. And this one institution was just talking about how that's something that they're going to start developing more. And a lot of that has to do with India wanting to be the location for the Olympics in 2036. And so they see that as a path to development. And it's a really great way to kind of rally the troops and sort of, try to up your game in terms of development. Because what that means is not only will they be, focusing on infrastructure development, but they will also be focusing on cleaning up, which will need to happen. Because one thing I absolutely experienced was the pollution that we hear about, specifically in Delhi, it was quite dense. And I think with the goal of the Olympics, that will absolutely, give them the incentive to clean up. Now, we've had to do that, in the 70s when we were probably back. We were a little bit maybe more developed than them, but we had to really start cleaning up our act as we were industrializing more and the economy was growing, and those are things that have to happen. And India is well aware of the need for sustainability and an energy mix that's also including more renewables. One thing that was mentioned is they are also looking at nuclear technologies, and specifically, they enacted some laws which will allow for more foreign participation, like American firms. And they were also very much looking at SMRs as a technology, which we are as well. The other thing I want to note too is just that um, the middle class was also apparent in the mall. When I was in Bhubaneswar, we visited a mall, and I was completely blown away at the shops there. It looked like a sort of a Western mall, sort of smaller scale with sort of Indian characteristics. And there was even like a Harley Davidson exhibition there, like promoting Harley Davidson bikes. So, and I also, when we were driving by, even at one point, I saw all these different shops that were selling like air conditioners and you name it. I mean, everything that you could possibly need to live more comfortably. I could see those stores. There were Subways, there were KFCs, there was a really good travel stop when we were driving at one point. Just things that you just wouldn't you take for granted, and that was absolutely not the case over 30 years ago. So again, I was witnessing firsthand what was happening in India. And finally, just sort of on a socioeconomic, cultural front, I just want to mention that the role of women and girls in the economy is a big agenda item for India. And it was absolutely visible. You would see women in the military, you would see women in positions as engineers, scientists, academics. Everywhere I went, absolutely women were making tracks. And it's a national priority. And I see it coming through in other ways. The Miss Nita Ambani, who won this humanitarian award while we were there, also talked about women and girls issues. And the institution we were at, the Kalinga Institute of Industrial Technology, and its counterpart, a social sciences school, I think they had like 70% were like women studying there. And so I think that's really good. They're going to have a really good balanced economy going forward. Women in leadership positions. The president of India is from actually Orissa. And and it turns out I was standing in front of the president's house in Delhi 30 years ago in a photo, and there were no cars there. And I asked the gentleman that was kind of overseeing our delegation, about it, and he said, yeah, that's where the president, where she lives right now. So that was kind of an irony from 30 years ago. Little did I know that I would be visiting the state where the woman that was in that presidential palace was from. So that was kind of cool and interesting. So, just looking ahead, some other things that sort of stood out to me, aside from the AI agenda that they also have, and it's part and parcel of them being really savvy and really good at IT. That's definitely on the agenda, and there's a lot of investment, like I said, from hyperscalers in that realm. And then again, the other agenda item is sports, and that's connected to the desire to hold the Olympics in 2036, and they will be working towards that that goal, along with some of their other competitors. I believe Turkey and maybe Qatar and Germany are in the run for that Olympics as well. I did see a lot of startups, and I would just that really gobsmacked me because it's just not something I would expect to see routinely. And I also did sit at a dinner with a young woman who was a co-founder of a coal startup where they're actually cleaning up the production side of producing coal, you know, sort of more close to the mine. And she met with us and spoke to us. And then finally, you know, there was also noted that there's been a really big deal with India. They are developing a new refinery in Brownsville, Texas. Again, that's a huge investment, and it's in partnership with Reliance Industries, which is a very big conglomerate in India. So that's about all I can say. But all I can say too is just India's on the move, and it was really, really obvious. And I was, you know, delighted to get to witness that firsthand, and expect that my history will keep, you know, converging with theirs. Cheers.